Australs have started the season brightly with a finals appearance in the first pre-season competition, going down 1-0 to Canberra, Croatia. In the past 6 weeks, Australs have been engaged in another series, this time the Challenge Cup, and have notched wins against North Shore, Sydney Macedonia and Sutherland, a draw with Avala, and the only blemish, a 2-4 result against Wollongong Macedonia. The rules for the Challenge Cup provide for performances from the major team as well as the youth team, with points being allocated for a win and draw by both teams. Wednesday night is crucial for BHP Australs, as they must beat the North Shore youth team and hope that Wollongong Macedonia can defeat, or at worst draw with, Sydney Macedonia. If that does happen, Australs will play their arch-rivals Canberra Croatia in Canberra on Sunday.
As state governments unveil relief schemes to help devastated flood victims, Newcastle's disaster relief program has hit the headlines once again. Today, Lord Mayor John McNaughton revealed that the injured and the families of those killed in the quake face lengthy delays in receiving compensation. The Lord Mayor's Fund can address their immediate needs, but until insurance questions are settled, victims face an uncertain future.
The big problem is that there are normally quite substantial payouts under public liability insurance. Now, since there's no liability, since there's been no negligence, I am told that there will be no payouts by the insurance companies, and therefore there will be very considerable strain on government agencies and the Lord Mayor's Relief Appeal.
So an earthquake victim is actually in a far worse position than, say, a car accident victim?
Oh, very considerably worse, because they're, at the present time there's no one admitting liability for anything, and we've just got this inordinate delay.
It's all grim news for anyone injured in the quake. They'll have no recourse for compensation until after the coroner's inquiry set down for early July. The Insurance Council defended its position today. Regional Manager Chris Henry says insurers are only open to claims for public liability if State Coroner Kevin Waller establishes negligence when he presides at the inquest. If no negligence is proved, the insurance companies say it's not their problem. Leslie Robinson, NBN News. This was Throsby Creek before hundreds of volunteers spent hours raking through the muck and removing truckloads of rubbish. The waterway was one of the 5 public areas targeted in yesterday's clean-up campaign. 500 people registered for the day. In all, they removed more than 300 tonnes of rubbish. That's more than half a tonne for everyone who joined in.
To find the indiscriminate dumping of rubbish, particularly builders' rubbish and refuse from households and that sort of thing, all through the Glenrock State Recreation Area, it's absolutely outrageous.
Well, the banks of Throsby Creek are certainly cleaner today than they were around a month ago when details of the clean-up were announced. The big question now is how long they can stay this way. The answer, it seems, depends on our everyday behaviour.
There's plenty of facilities to dump rubbish properly. Take it to our rubbish dumps and leave it there where it's properly disposed of, and don't behave like a slob.
Even today it was apparent that yesterday's clean-up only achieved cosmetic improvements. While this reserve was transformed across the creek in another part of Carrington, residents looked on a familiar vista. Plastic bottles, polystyrene and assorted garbage. Organisers hope next year's clean-up will reap less rubbish, but that, they say, hinges on the goodwill and cooperation of consumers and companies alike.
Two years ago, classy Central Coast stayer Lord Highbrow was the punter's favourite, with a dashing win in the Brisbane Cup. In 1990, he's regarded as a senior citizen of the track.
He gets cranky sometimes, but he is getting older, so you'd have to expect that of it.
Well, at 8 years old, how much more has he got in him?
Well, I don't know. I really haven't got a clue.
Lord Highbrow was getting the treatment elder statesmen deserve today in preparation for the Gosford Cup. Wyong trainer Neville McBurney says he'll be happy if the gelding finishes in the top 6. With winnings of more than $1 million, Lord Highbrow isn't needing the prize money. But with 8 major cup wins behind him, early betting still puts him in with a chance at 11-2. Another millionaire of the track will be racing tomorrow at Gosford. Like Lord Highbrow, Kensei is getting on in age. The 7-year-old's last win was the 1987 Melbourne Cup. Trainer McBurney again rates him as an outsider, but says such a great horse is capable of anything.
He has ability that 80% of horses haven't got.
NBN's tipster Gary Harley has opted for Our Poverty Bay over the 2100 metres. He says the 4-year-old should be too good, with a 9-kilogram drop in weight from racing at Randwick last month.
Charity Awareness Week was first organised in Sydney by the Premier's wife, Catherine Greiner, but there has never been a similar promotion in Newcastle. The management of Wallsend Plaza offered its floor space to set up displays and offer advice and information to the public. They saw the need to bring the various charities and volunteer groups under the one roof to show the public the range of organisations that offer support to the needy and to appeal for both financial and volunteer help. The Lady Mayoress, Margaret McNaughton, is the patroness of the week and officially opened Charity Week this morning.
It's just one way of making people aware of what charities are functioning, and it's also a way of asking people to volunteer their help. And I'm sure if people would give their time and talent and service to some of the organisations, they'd find one that they could happily relate to.
There are many groups that are not well known to the general public, ranging from mental illness support to adult reading classes. Charity Awareness Week is designed to bring them to the attention of the public, particularly those who may benefit from their help. The displays will be in Wallsend Plaza until Saturday.
The sun may have been shining on Port Stephens this week, but the future of its 60 or so oyster farmers is under a dark cloud. Despite the contamination being confined to Sydney and the offending oysters being traced to the Georges River, they're quickly discovering when it comes to oyster growing, they're all tarred with the same brush.
Most people are more and more conscious of what they eat, and I think if there's any doubt, you know, I could see 50% of people that normally eat oysters would say no.
Swan Bay grower Rod Moffat has been in the industry more than 30 years. His family survived the scare of 1978 in which thousands were affected by contaminated oysters, but he fears the stigma attached to this latest incident may be hard to shrug off.
After any type of scare situation, there's always a percentage of any food, I believe, that you will lose or will never come back.
To date, Port Stephens oysters have not been at the centre of a scare. Rod Moffat believes it's because of the relative isolation and tranquility of its waters and the strict guidelines local growers like himself adhere to. Every one of the 3 million oysters sold from the Moffat leases each year undergo a 36-hour depuration process.
My attitude is I treat my oysters as totally contaminated until they come out of the tank.
It's an attitude and a process Rod believes the Georges River growers may have chosen to ignore. But if you think once these oysters are opened and boxed, they're sent off into the wild blue yonder, never to be heard of again, then you're sadly mistaken. Every time an oyster leaves an operation like this, whether it be in a box or a bottle, it's labelled, and those labels provide the very finest details, right down to the grower's name, the lease number, even the temperature at which the oysters were purified, so that if anything ever did go wrong, the authorities know exactly where to point the finger. Nevertheless, for the present, things are bleak. Swan Bay processor George Brown reports his sales have slumped from 1,500 dozen weekly to just 800 dozen, and he suspects in the coming weeks that could halve again.
Dennis Henderson took up golf 5 years ago. After just 12 months, he got sick of his buggy toppling over in the rough and having to carry a bulky umbrella. So he sat down and made a better golf buggy. 4 years later, this is the product of his labours. It folds out from boot size to this large three-wheeled frame. Despite its bulk, it's surprisingly light. The special feature is the no-hands canopy, which fits to the buggy and protects the keen golfer from both sun and rain. Dennis has dubbed his invention the Caddy Cruiser and is now confident he's on a winner after taking out a silver medal at an international inventors exhibition.
Yes, I was very surprised actually. I didn't know I'd had won a medal until about 20 minutes after it was into the presentations, because it was all in French. So I really didn't know I'd picked up a medal at all.
The buggy has cost Dennis $90,000 to develop to this stage. Some local engineering companies and a muffler workshop helped him build this prototype. When in production, Dennis says he could sell the buggy for under $300. But like most Australian inventors, he's being frustrated in his efforts to build the buggy locally.
Maybe the Europeans do see the advantages of having new projects on the market. I just like to think that there are some companies out there that this might promote this buggy, and we can make it an overseas market with Australian people behind it.
A test run today proved that the buggy was light and manoeuvrable. It also proved that my putting needs a little attention. So while the Caddy Cruiser may improve your playing conditions, it won't do much for the way you hit the ball. John Church, NBN News.
With hundreds felled in Sydney in the past week, State Agriculture Minister Ian Armstrong was quick to act, immediately placing a ban on all sales from the Georges River, the source of the contaminated product. However, what local growers didn't know at first was that they too were blanketed by that ban, along with their counterparts at Narooma and the Torres River. Swan Bay processor George Brown admitted he was stunned by the move. He says despite the ban being placed yesterday, no formal announcement has still been made locally. The ban will last a week, then the situation will be reviewed. According to Mr Armstrong's office, it was necessary because in the past there have been cases where farmers from banned areas have shipped their oysters to other leases to sell them. George Brown said he had heard of such incidences, but nevertheless said the ban was going to make things extremely tough. He said it was likely sales will remain at almost zero for at least a month after the ban is lifted, simply because it will increase the consumers' awareness of the contamination scare. Meanwhile, still on the contamination issue, State Environment Minister Tim Moore was laying down the law to the hunters industry leaders in Newcastle today over their obligations in protecting the environment. Addressing a seminar attended by more than 300 representatives from mining, manufacturing, education and building, Mr Moore stressed the Greiner government is getting tough with companies convicted of pollution offences. Though he did admit, despite its high percentage of heavy industry, he was pleased with the hunters' track record.
By and large, the industrial performance, as I understand it, in Newcastle is a bit better than in Sydney, but there is a need for us to make sure that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past and that we clean up the mistakes that we've inherited from the past.
Motorists on Griffith Road may have noticed the evolution of this factory in recent months. Until this week it looked like any other, with a concrete slab and tilt-up concrete walls. What makes this building different is the choice of roof supports. The developer, Dex Building Supplies, chose special laminated timber beams over the conventional steel. For about the same price, they're mounted in special harnesses, which allow the beams and joints to move independently.
It's not earthquake proof, but it certainly is earthquake resistant. It's totally flexible. Every component in the building is flexible. The concrete slab is a traditional concrete slab, but is flexible. The walls are a tilt-up panel, and they're flexible. They can move against each other. The timber itself is very flexible, and the thing that makes it earthquake resistant is the steel connectors that we've used, that we've imported with the timber.
The beams will span the 1,900 square metres of floor space with just 2 support posts at a cost of close to $800,000. The longest beam spans just under 20 metres. That's about 65 feet. This technology is old hat in the US, New Zealand and other earthquake-prone countries. But it's relatively new to Australia. In fact, this is the first of its kind in Newcastle. But while this technique may prove popular after the earthquake, it'll do nothing for our balance of trade. The nearest Australian quote was 85% dearer than the Californian supplier.
None of the Australian quotations were competitive.
The Maritime Services Board appointed Captain Peter Williams as investigating officer when the Negluca capsized and sank at Port Stephens on January 8. Today, the results of that investigation were tendered to Newcastle Coroner's Court. Captain Williams reported that rescue of the 5 children in the forward cabin was almost impossible, as the cabin hatch could only be opened from the inside. His statement said the children were too young to know how to operate the hatch opening. The court heard the 5 youngsters had very little chance of escaping due to the sheer volume of water rising in the forward cabin. Also before the court today, the teenage children of Dennis Warner, the skipper of the ill-fated Negluca. 15-year-old Luke Warner said his father asked him to do a head count on the way to Swan Bay. He said he couldn't recall the number, but agreed it was the most people he'd ever seen on his family's cruiser. The court heard that Luke Warner switched off the engines when the boat capsized. He helped people get out, then stood on top of the hull and waved a bright-coloured shirt to attract help. It was the second day in the witness box for Werner Bunshu, a naval architect with the Maritime Services Board. In a lengthy cross-examination, Mr Bunshu told the court that empty of people and provisions, the Negluca had a proper centre of gravity. But with an added 2 to 3 tonnes in passenger weight, that centre of gravity rose considerably. With the circumstances on January 8, he said the boat would have capsized even if it was stationary. Under cross-examination from Ken Garling, solicitor for the parents of the dead children, Mr Bunshu agreed that a boat with that load was an accident looking for a place to happen. The inquest continues in Newcastle tomorrow before moving to Sydney next week. Leslie Robinson for NBN News.
Transport Ministers Baird and Brown jointly revealed that an extra $120 million will be spent before 1993, a total of $300 million compared with only $115 million in the previous 3 years. And they estimated after a meeting in Canberra this morning that $1 billion will be spent over the next 10 years on what's widely regarded as the biggest road problem in Australia. In a joint statement, the ministers said more than 1,000 people have died on the Pacific Highway in the last decade, and the carnage cannot be allowed to continue. The funding boost is based on an agreement that New South Wales receives its share of the federal government's Black Spots program and its new Provincial Cities and Rural Highways program. This means Canberra will double its existing funding and the state will match it over the next 3 years. Highway improvements such as extra lanes, widening and straightening can now be brought forward significantly. Both Mr Baird and Mr Brown agreed the ultimate aim is to make the highway dual carriageway all the way to Queensland.
It looks like a peaceful slice of Australian bushland nestled in the heart of Newcastle, but the Blackbutt Reserve is threatening to become a political battlefield. Plans to relocate native animals housed there have outraged local residents, who formed a placard-waving mob at last night's City Council briefing. They wanted to let the aldermen know just how strongly they felt about the issue.
The emotion is running high because it's very important that the efforts that have been put into what we're all about tonight is that the animals are retained in our beautiful Blackbutt Reserve and the Blackbutt Reserve upgraded.
But Council's Blackbutt Advisory Committee has thrown its weight squarely behind the Mackenzie report, claiming it doesn't necessarily spell the end for the animals.
For example, he's talked about relocating them into modern dome-like structures on the edge of the reserve. He's also talked about taking the land that was taken off when Carnley Avenue was put through and developing a great cage system like modern exhibits of animals.
Council is expected to formally consider the proposal within the next 3 weeks, and the aldermen can look forward to another colourful reception.
I think there'll be a bigger turn up next time because we feel that this evening is all learning for us. We want to know more about the report, and also we want to be sure that we are here for the next meeting to make sure that we are looking after Blackbutt Reserve for the people of Newcastle.
My Lord Mayor, it's our very great pleasure to come to City Hall today to hand on to you the proceeds of our Radiothon back in March.
The final stage of the success story that was the ABC's March 18 Radiothon. For the ABC, it was effectively a groundbreaker. The event was the first national fundraiser of its type. Today, ABC's Newcastle manager Murray Findlay admitted there were some nerve-wracking minutes as the 40 telephones were plugged in the phone room at City Hall on the big day, and the moment came for them to start ringing. But within minutes of its launch, the room echoed with jangling phones and, even more satisfying, plenty of STD beeps.
We weren't sure, and we were just delighted that from all around Australia, donations small and large, and I mean from all around, from the Gulf country and from Western Australia and indeed from Queensland, overall was very generous.